Okay, let me just get started. What we're going to be focusing on now in this session is what we call the preceding scenario to homosexual enactment. Basically, that means a special time in the session, and I'm assuming that many of you are therapists or counselors, or if you're not, then maybe you're dealing with this issue and you can relate to this personally. But when the client comes in and says they acted out that week, you want to get them to focus on what set them up for homosexual enactment. And what you want them to do is look at the preceding scenario, the sequence of events that led them up to homosexual enactment. Now, many people think, who have been struggling with homosexuality for years, they get to that point where I want to act out, I shouldn't act out. I want to act out, I shouldn't act out. And eventually they lose out. Eventually they capitulate, even though they postpone the enactment. Okay? So the battle for the homosexual enactment happens long before they reach that point. So we do it this way. We create this situation. This is an A. That's assertion. And if you draw a diagram and leave space because we're going to be moving in this direction. Let me describe what this is. Assertion is a self-state, and we'll be talking about self-states. Self-states are frame of mind, attitude, feelings about yourself, viewpoint. We have many self-states within us. But we're focusing on the assertion. The assertion is this. You express to the client. Have you ever had the experience of being secure and confident and feeling good about yourself and not being distracted by cell phones? You know, things like that. That's okay. But I mean, really being centered and focused and feeling okay with yourself and expressing yourself naturally to people and feeling connected to others and feeling connected to yourself, being in your integrity. If you're a religious person, you're feeling good in your relationship to God. And everyone can relate to that, even however briefly those moments are. But they know what you're talking about. And when the client says, yeah, I can remember that, you say, were you feeling any homosexual temptation at that time? No. And they begin to realize that the self-state of assertion, that sense of clarity and centeredness, is when homosexuality is not at all on their mind. Even if they think about it, it's just a thought. It's easily dismissed. So now we've established the assertion. At the other extreme we have HE, homosexual enactment. Homosexual enactment is a different self-state. You're focused in acting out. You're very narrow in what you're looking for. You're disconnected from other people. You're in your own little world. You're compelled to act out, but there's no real centeredness. There's no real clarity of mind. It's just about homosexual enactment. And homosexual enactment can be different things for different clients. Some people see it as maybe connecting with another guy and having sex with someone, or just having sexual fantasies. Whatever that is for the client, he needs to know what homosexual enactment is. So now we've established two self-states. The self-state of assertion, in which there seems to be no homosexual thoughts or feelings or temptations, and the homosexual enactment moment. And you say to the client, all we have to do is figure out what gets you here and learn what those steps are. And if we can keep you here, then you never have to worry about this. And that's really the secret of reparative therapy. If we keep you in a healthy state of mind, if we keep you connected to yourself and to others, there is no place for homosexuality. There's no room for homosexuality. So now we have to understand what the variables are. And this is called shame. Shame is a generalized word that we use to kind of encapsulate that other self-state. And this self-state is someone will say something or do something that'll shut you down. There'll be a collapse. Whenever you're working with a client and they remember a traumatic moment, it's that embodied collapse. And by the way, these are embodied self-states, which is to say, the body is in a particular place. You're standing up, Your posture is different here. You're open, you're receptive, you're expressive. Here you're shut down, you're collapsed. The body of the shame posture is a closing in on oneself. Today I did a session with a client, and he recalled a very traumatic experience of being made fun of. And when he went into that memory, he felt collapsed. In the session, he felt collapsed. So it's important for the client to know what that feels like. So shame is the opposite of assertion. And by the way, shame always happens when the person was in the assertive state. Let me explain what I mean by that. The time the person is most vulnerable, all of us are most vulnerable to shame moments, is when we're truly being ourselves. When you're open and expressive and your guard is down, that's when you're most susceptible to shame. That's why the homosexual is always in a defensive posture. He's always in a self-conscious, ill-at-ease, guarded posture, because he doesn't trust this place. This place means, watch out, you might get zapped. All traumatic shame moments were preceded by being open and honest and self-expressive. The shame moment shuts the person down. This goes back to, Alan Shore's research on the infant malattunement. He's been sensitized to malattunement, and that is the affective shutdown, the hypoaffect, closing down. That throws him in this state, and that sets him up to this. It's called GZ, gray zone. The shame moment throws the client into the gray zone. This is what the gray zone is. The gray zone is a little different from all the other self states in that it's not truly a self state, it's more like a mood. And the mood is basically detached, zoned out, numb, disconnected, depressed, blah, hopeless, helpless. There's a generalized sense of anger and irritability and frustration, but it's not directed anywhere. And the person can stay in that place for a very long time. Some of our clients live there. As one client said to me, that's where my zip code is, the gray zone. And they know that. So my wife says, never speak in absolutes. I'm speaking absolutely here. Shame always throws a person into the gray zone. And the gray zone always sets the person up for homosexual enactment. So when you're working with the client, you say, I acted out on Tuesday night. How did you feel just before you acted out? And the answer is always the same. I don't remember. They never remember how they felt just before they decided to act out. Because why? Because they weren't present to themselves. They don't remember. They're on autopilot. They're shut down. They're dead. Which is, by the way, why many of our clients have poor memories of their childhood. They don't remember much of their childhood because they were in the gray zone. They were disconnected. And you've got to be feeling your feelings for your memories. Our memory is built on our body sensations. Our memory is in our body. Our memory is not in our brain, our memory is in our body. So if you shut down the body, you shut down the memory. Example, let me give you an example of how our memory is in our body. If I were to ask you right now, in your shower at home, do you turn the knob left or right to bring out the hot water in the shower? You got to do it with your hand. Have you found yourself doing that? Does anybody drive a stick? Where's reverse? You kind of have to, oh, yours is over there. All right. But you see, the memory is in the body. Give you another quick example of that, because it's so important. The body work is so important to reparative therapy. Example, I had a client who, he was sitting around with some people, and they said, we should go to Europe this summer, and there were 3 or 4 girls, and they organized everything, and he went to Europe, spent 2 weeks in Europe, and they led everything. They set it all up, they set up, and he went along. He came back and had no memory of Europe. Couldn't remember. He had snapshots I remember the Eiffel Tower, I remember, but there was no, because he wasn't there. The year later, however, he saw just enough to get his curiosity up, so the year later he went by himself. He traveled alone. And he made all the decisions, where he was going to sleep, where he was going to eat, how he was going to travel. He came back full of memories because he was there this time. So when you ask your client what state of mind or what was going on before you acted out, they don't remember. So you stay with that, and they begin to remember. I was feeling down, I was feeling lonely, I was feeling disconnected, and the impulse to act out. Then you say to them, what got you there? The same answer, I don't know, I don't remember. And now you do detective work. We call this detective work as part of the preceding scenario. You say, well, let's see now, if you acted out on the Tuesday and you were in the gray zone just before you acted out, how were you feeling Tuesday morning? Tuesday morning, I remember waking up and not feeling very good, feeling very disconnected. Okay. How were you feeling Monday night when you went to bed? Monday night, yeah, pretty lousy, come to think of it. Yeah, I was thinking of, okay. How did you feel Monday morning? Monday morning, yeah, I remember waking up feeling pretty good about Monday morning. I remember waking up Monday morning and looking forward to going to school, going to work. In fact, I was going to have lunch with my friend that afternoon. I was looking forward to it. So he was in the assertion on Monday morning. But by Monday night, he was here. So now we're narrowing the focus. Tell me more about Monday. Well, let's see. I remember looking forward to having lunch with my friend. And we met and we were talking. And I remember I wanted to talk to him about something. And while I was talking to him, he zoned out. He disconnected. He changed the subject. Shame. Shut down. That's all it takes. That's all it takes. Go to your body right now as you remember your friend's face while you were trying to talk to him about whatever that was. He was sitting there and I could just see that he looked bored, or he seemed disconnected, or he was reaching for his cell phone or whatever it was. Our clients are that sensitive to rejection. They're so sensitive to rejection that when they recall a shame moment, they always apologize for it. This may sound stupid, but I know this is dumb, but I know this sounds petty, but, and then they go right into it. And if you go to the body, there is that affective collapse. And this goes back, and maybe we'll spend a few minutes talking about why our clients are so sensitive to shame. Because they were conditioned in the early mother-son relationship to be sensitized to shame. I know there might be some mothers here. Are you a mother?
Yeah.
You don't mind?
There are 2 parents, right?
That's exactly. In fact, there are 3 people, your son too. Of course, absolutely. Good, so we take care of that. I've never really, people keep saying, oh, you're hurting the parents, and no parent has ever come up to me angry or anything. You just try to relate to it and whatever. Okay. So we'll talk in a minute about the early mother-infant relationship. But the point is, our clients are very sensitive to rejection. What do gay men say? What a homosexual? I'm a very sensitive person. You're right, you're a very sensitive person. Not so much to others, but you're sensitive for yourself. You're always anticipating shame. Now, it's very interesting because when you start to work with your clients and you start analyzing those shame moments, they begin to discover that it's not that someone shamed you, but you shamed yourself. And we say as a general rule, children get shamed. You can shame a child, but only adults shame themselves. So your friend looked away. Your friend reached for the cell phone. You interpreted that as a rejection. You shamed yourself by that interpretation. And that has to be worked through as part of the therapy. Looking at those shame moments and seeing that they are anticipatory or precipitory shame. Anticipatory means you're so sensitive, you're waiting for it to happen that it's going to happen. Precipitory is actually creating it to happen. And there are many examples in which our clients actually set up the situation to shame themselves. Much of which is projection. Okay, but notice it's not a nice clean arrow from A to S. The arrow is going to go more like this in this case. And that is going to be double bind. Double bind. So the way from A to S is through a particular kind of communication called a double bind communication. And when you analyze with the client what actually kicked them here, you're going to see a particular sequence of interaction. And the interaction is this. Step number 1. The other person says something or does something that creates in the client a negative feeling. Whether it be anger or sadness or hurt or disappointment or frustration, some kind of negative feeling gets stirred up in the client by this other person's behavior, implicitly or explicitly. And most of the shame communications are implicit. A facial expression, a gesture, a body. This is all the right brain that's picking up. This is the unconscious, the right brain. The left brain is saying, I shouldn't make a big fuss over this, I must be too sensitive. But the right brain is getting the subliminal communications. And when you talk about parent-child early connection, it's right brain, right brain. In fact, even the therapeutic relationship is really right brain, right brain. The unconscious communication. Okay, so again, the steps of the double bind. Step number 1, the other person says or does something that creates in the other a negative feeling. Step number 2, the client, the receiver of it, wants to express, but he inhibits it because he believes that if I say something about what just happened, I'll make the situation worse. He'll turn on me, he'll make me really feel stupid now, or he'll reject me, or he'll make me feel like I'm wrong, or whatever that is. He's anticipating the double bind situation. Why is he anticipating? Because that's what he got as a child. The early family dynamic is you are being made to feel bad for feeling bad. And so he shuts down. No use in fighting, no use in protesting. I abdicate my own rights. I give up on my own power. And that's why we see this pervasive passivity, this pervasive sense of powerlessness in relationships. That's the homosexual condition. The homosexual condition is anticipation of shame. If somebody does something, I can't speak up because if I speak up, I'll only make things worse. So he shuts down. And if you work with the client, you'll see that pattern. Why couldn't you tell your friend during lunch that you feel like he's not interested? Well, if I tell him, he might say, you know what, I'm really not interested because you're complaining and I'm tired of your complaints or whatever. Whatever he's anticipating. Okay. The opposite of double bind is this, from here to here, and that's double loop. Double loop is as follows. The other person says or does something that creates in the other person a negative feeling. Hurt, anger, sadness, disappointment, frustration, whatever. The recipient tells the person what they just did and how it makes them feel. 2 steps. What you just did and how it makes me feel. If the other person says, oh, so when I reached to my cell phone, you felt like I wasn't listening to you. Or, oh, when I said that, you thought I was blah, 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 blah. And the person is responding not in a mechanical way, but in a really understanding way. When that happens, and you got to add this last point because some of our clients don't want to go there, to be able to trust and to believe the person recognizes what they did. Because many times the other person will be very sincere, but the client's guardedness and trust issues cannot really receive. Oh, he's just saying that, but he really doesn't. So he has to really believe that. And when he does, there's a shift in the body. There's actually a shift in the body, and they go, oh, and they kick back to the assertion. Not only do they kick back to the assertion, but they feel closer to that person. They actually feel closer to that person because now there's a deeper connection. And this happens all the time in therapy. You're constantly monitoring your relationship with your client because you could do the slightest little thing and they feel a little shame, but they bury it. But you sense that there's a little detachment now from you. You sense that there's just a little step back from you. And if you're attuned, you say, what's going on here? Well, something you said 10 minutes ago, or something you said 2 sessions back. You said blah, 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 and I felt blah, 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 and then you go, oh, so when and then you say, how do you feel about what I just said? Well, you're just saying that. Well, it's your job. No, really. I mean, do I look insincere? And you really make that connection. And when they make that double loop connection, they kick back to the assertion, and they feel closer to you, and you feel closer to them. Because it's been a test of the relationship, and the two of you passed the test. The metacommunication is something happened between us, but we repaired it together. And that's what our clients need to experience. They need to experience double loop moments, because when they have double loop moments, not only do they connect with other, they connect with themselves, which gets us to the definition. What do we mean by double bind, double loop? These are the two people, right? This is your client, this is the other or you. Let's just say therapist-client. A double bind, the reason why we say a double bind is because when the person goes into shame, they are disconnected from the other. There's a psychological barrier. But there's also another barrier, the barrier between left brain, right brain. The left brain, which is the more rational cognitive, is saying, oh, no big deal, no big deal. But the right brain is feeling the hurt and disappointment and the shutdown. There's a disconnect. So the binds are double, interpersonal and intrapsychic. That's this, double bind. Double loop is, we have a chocolate thing here. The double loop is right brain, left brain, a unification, and an intrapsychic loop. So there's a nice back and forth between one and the other. I'm feeling this and you're feeling that about what I just said, and I'm feeling this about what you just said, and when you just said that I'm feeling this, and I'm telling you about how I just felt, and it's a nice loop. And of course there's the intrapsychic. That's why the person shifts to the assertion. When the person goes, that's a neurophysiological shift. I now feel reconnected to myself. When a client has a good session, you say, how do you feel? I feel calmer. I feel more centered. I feel better inside of myself. That's attunement. The attunement is the double loop. The only thing about the double loop, the reason why the double loop is more than just attunement, is because you're getting your client to articulate the experience of the double loop. You want him to verbalize it, because many of our clients deny their own progress. If you're working with guys with a homosexual problem, they do fantastic work, and then at the end of the session, how did you do? Oh, I guess it was all right. Like, don't you, look, I got a page and a half of notes here, you know? You want to read them? But because they deny, so you say to them, so what was the experience? How do you feel now? And you get them to articulate it, because by articulating it, you're stimulating left brain response to the right brain affect, linking the two parts of the brain. Okay. So this is a diagram that I give the clients to know. Put it on your refrigerator door. This is the story of your life. So what happens is, over time, the client stays further and further away from here and stays closer and closer to here, because they pay attention to their body, and their body is going to give them signals. Remember, memory is in the body. So all they know, before they become aware of this, all they know is everything was fine, and all of a sudden I acted out. I don't know what happened, here I was. Now they learn to identify the gray zone. So they get a warning. They know that if they're in the gray zone, they know two things. I was shamed and I'm going here. And what do I want to do about it? See, I can get here. I can double loop with someone. I can call up a friend and double loop and get back to the assertion. I could double loop with myself eventually by being honest with myself. How am I feeling right now? I am feeling down. I am feeling irritated. I am feeling, what happened? Let's see. Oh, it was that thing about the person said whatever. How do I feel about that? I feel angry. I feel hurt. Visualize that person. Stay with it. Maintain your integrity with yourself, and you can bounce back to your assertion. You may need to do it with the therapist in the beginning. You may need to do it with friends, but eventually you can do it with yourself. All right. So the person gets a signal that this is coming. They get another signal before, which is the shame moment. So when your body shuts down and you feel that sinking, dropping, collapsing, you know that you've just been shamed. Or more precisely, you just shamed yourself. So you got two warnings before you get here. This bodily sensation and this bodily sensation. Actually, there's a little one in between. It's called the gap. And there's a momentary gap. This is the hard one, though. The momentary gap is from the time you decide to act out till the time you actually act out. Now, for some reason, I don't know why, but when clients say they just began the enactment, oh, I'll just see what's on the website. Oh, I'll just take another look at that magazine. Whatever that little thing is, that seems to kick them into the whole behavioral pattern. So there's a momentary gap between the idea and the beginning of the enactment, where this is your last, if you miss these two signals, you get your last shot here. It's like when we used to go to the George Washington Bridge, it was the final exit before you had to pay, in case you shouldn't have been on the bridge, That's basically it. Now to complicate things, or to go further, we add this. That's grief. So you might draw a diagram this way and say this part is the past and this is all present. This is present. This is what's going on today in your life. This is about the past. This is grief work. This is about what happened in the past. That was very interesting. One way of looking at the relationship between shame and grief is that shame is a defense against grief. That's a hard thing for people to grasp. But shame is a defense against grief. If the person goes into shaming, they are protecting against grief. They have to release the shame to go into the grief. Why is that so? Because Freud in 1917 wrote a fantastic paper called Mourning and Melancholia. And basically, when he said mourning and melancholia, he was talking about gray zone and grief. Melancholia was gray zone. Mourning is this, grief. And people would rather go into melancholia than go into grief. Because he said, in melancholia, I don't blame the people that caused this in me. See, when you go to grief, you have to face the reality of what was denied you, how your parents failed you. So Freud said the patient protects his parents, basically, by avoiding the grief and by becoming melancholic, because melancholia is not really feeling. It's a pseudo-grief. Gray zone is a pseudo-grief. It's a false grief. So this is an area that you work on later on into the therapy. And grief work will return them to the assertion. Now we have a little, Diana Fosha comes up with this phrase, a true self-state has two qualities to it, which she calls feeling and dealing. Feeling and dealing should be like a little test as to whether or not a self-state is a valid self-state. Feeling and dealing means feeling, I'm really feeling my feelings, and I'm really dealing with the reality. So let's try Foch's criteria of a valid self-state to these. Let's start with this. In the assertion, is that feeling and dealing? Nobody's sure. What do you think? Yes. Yeah, because in the assertion, the person is feeling and dealing. In shame, is he feeling or dealing? He's feeling, but he's not dealing. Yeah, he's feeling, but he's not dealing. Okay, so that doesn't, they don't make true criteria. In the gray zone, is he feeling and dealing? Neither one. He's neither feeling nor is he dealing. Homosexual enactment, is he feeling and dealing? He's dealing, but he's not feeling. And that's true. In the homosexual enactment, he's dealing, but he's not feeling. He's driven by the compulsion of it, but he's not, if it's a sexual relationship with another person, he's not really connected to the other person. Grief, is he feeling and dealing? He is. So the only two valid self-states are assertion and grief. Assertion and grief are the only two productive self-states. And that's why that's why the person will bounce into assertion. Because when he's done enough grief work, doesn't mean he's done complete the grief work. But to whatever extent he's capable of doing grief work in that particular session, if he really touches something deep and feels it, and you support him, he will bounce into assertion. And people say, well, how do you get to assertion? It happens all by itself. They just bounce out of it. They know on some level they can take just so much, and then they come out of it. They may need to go back later on, but it's like when someone dies, you know, if you've ever experienced the loss of a loved one, you're grieving, but then you kind of pop out of it. It's like you could tolerate it just so much. And then the reality comes back again, and then you kind of pop out. The analogy is kind of like pushing a beach ball in the pool. You push it underwater. The more you push it, the more it's going to pop up. And it happens on its own. And the therapist has to be willing to go with that. Let me spend another minute on shame and grief. When you're working with the client, this goes back to Freud's notion of staying in shame as a way of protecting the parents. This pathway from shame to grief is a double pathway. It's anger for the other and sadness for the self. Anger for the other, sadness or compassion for the self. So when the client, and he'll go back and forth. Many of the therapists we train, they say, oh no, you got to be in anger. So when the person goes to sadness, they want to push him back to anger, or vice versa. They will go back and forth from moment to moment, as long as it's like a double pathway. As long as it's anger toward the other and sadness and compassion for myself. The way the person goes from back to shame is to feel anger at the self and sadness and compassion for the other. So when they're trying to do grief work, suddenly they will come up with a shaming thought. Oh, this is not working. I know you expect me to cry, but I guess I can't do it. That's self-shaming. Put that aside. And you make the intervention. You make a very direct intervention. You know, you don't analyze it. Look, you're shaming yourself right now. Is this what you want to do? Put it aside. Go back to your body. Go back to the feeling. Hold them there. And they may be sitting here for the longest time. I feel nothing. They're back. I feel nothing. I know I should. But then you just sit there and with them, compassion, understand, and they go through the grief work. That's basically the whole thing. And maybe you have some questions. Anybody have some questions on this? Yes. We do EMDR as necessary. As necessary, it's part of the therapy. But it seems to work on the big traumas. But even little traumas, you know, it's true. Yeah.
What about the use of EMDR, not just for the trauma part, but also strengthening the positive cognition?
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't do it that much. We do something else, we did a different version of that. I talked about this yesterday at the other we talk about the triangle of containment. Triangle of containment is this. This is the triangle of containment. So once a client identifies a problem, we call it an object, or an identified conflict, something they want to work on, you hold them on this object, and you say, go to your body. How do you feel in your body right now as you say this? And how are we doing? And what's the image? And how does that feel? You feel like I'm okay with you? Whatever. You keep them here. You keep them away from conversation, chit-chat, talk. Because talk is about this to him, but there's no body. But when they get into the body, and I talk about the dissociative glaze versus the focused glaze. And when your client is paying attention, you see it in their eyes. And it's really great to work with adolescents, by the way. Adolescents, they just do that. I'll say to them, one kid, how do you feel about that? This is what he says. I said, how do you feel? He says, wait. You could see like he's really in there, you know? He's like, and you're waiting, because now you're looking at his eyes, something's going to come out, right? Versus the glazed look, which is, how do you feel about that? Like nothing. Hello? That's dissociation. Dissociation is the primary defense in homosexuality. That's where the narcissism comes from. The narcissism is a compensation for the dissociation. I'm in my own world. That's why there's a high correlation between homosexuality and narcissism. Whereas with lesbianism, it's more borderline features that we talked about yesterday. Because that's an earlier trauma with the mother, borderline features. So you hold them here. So let's think about EMDR. Compare EMDR. EMDR, what are you doing? You're holding onto the object, and you're stimulating left brain, right brain, left brain, right brain. Why? Because trauma is, according to Shapiro, does anybody know what EMDR is? Oh, okay, EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprogramming. Very interesting. Francine Shapiro was walking in the park. She made a fortune from a moment in the park. She was walking in the park, and she was thinking about something that was distressing to her. And there were a bunch of birds flying by, pigeons or something. And she was looking at them, and then she went back to her thought, and she realized that it didn't have that negative charge. She was able to look at it, but what happened? She thought about it, and it was a stimulation of left brain, right brain. And this is what trauma is. Trauma is the body gets hit with something, but the left brain cannot make sense of it. So it's like an undigested sandwich, is what she says. It's an undigested sandwich. So the left brain cannot, that's why we do the narrative at the end of the session. What did you think of this session? What did you make of it? You're forcing the left brain to pull it into a narrative, to unify. And that's why the talking cure, the talking cure? Because there's something curative about talking. There's something curative about feeling and talking to another who seems to understand you. Because that helps the integration of left brain, right brain. So in EMDR, you tell the person, hold on to the traumatic image, and where do you feel it in the body? Give it from 0 to 10, and then you do 20 swipes. You say, don't move your head, move your eyes, hold the image, and do this 23 times? It's 12 if you do one, like that's 1, 2. First time? 27 for, well, I didn't get that far. I do 22 times, that's it. See, I've been cheating them, that's why they're not getting better. If I would have waited 5 more times. So, I now I owe them all a rebate. No. So you do it, and then you go, all right, so how do you feel in the body? And they're like stunned. They go, because you don't say anything, right? You just say, what comes up for you, right? No interpretation, which is difficult for therapists because we were trained to say something. So you just stop and you look at them and you go, what comes up for you? And they go, you know, after a while, the affect gets lower, and then they start to have insights, associated insights, like he maybe didn't mean it, or it's not that important, Stuff like that. I mean, they have, so what are you doing? You're stimulating left brain, right brain regarding that. So look at it here. The body is the body part, and the therapist is the conduit between the cognitive picture, the left brain, and the body, which is the right brain, and the therapist is the connection between the two. You can look at it that way. The therapist is the facilitator between left brain and right brain hemisphere. So EMDR fits very well with this whole reparative therapy approach. And the entire movement in psychotherapy right now for using the body. And it's very big now in Southern California and in New York. AEDP, which is affect, what is it, AEDP, FOSHA, F-O-S-H-A. It's very interesting because we use FOSHA's book all the time for our supervision. And I wrote her a letter. I said, I want you to know that your book is a foundation for our therapy, affect, and we're working with men who want to overcome their homosexuality. No response. No response. So it happened many times with different therapists. Yes?
To focus just a little bit more on the double loop, how are healthy ways that you can develop that better in your life?
You have to be aware of how you're feeling. This is the hard part for the clients. When they experience a double bind situation, they shut down. And so you teach them to cognitively do two things. So you give them specifics. The two things that you need to do to get out of a double bind is, number one, feel your feeling consciously, number one. And then number two, tell that person how what they did makes you feel. So you got to do two things. Tell the person what they did, and then tell them how it makes you feel. Now that's pretty hard for a person who's anticipating shame. Oh, it's not going to work. They'll never. It's going to sound like complaining. I'm going to sound like too sensitive or whatever. But if they can start to practice, and I say practice on little things, find little opportunities, Don't make it a big showdown. But if they can do that, then you're giving the other person the opportunity to respond. Now, sometimes the person may not respond. So imagine your client finally getting up the nerve to, instead of going into the shame posture, he remembers, he said, right now, Tony, when you reached out for the cell phone, it made me feel you weren't interested in me. So Mr. Sensitive Tony, he says, what's the big deal? I was just getting shame again. So his attempt to double loop is met with another double bind, right? So what do? You do it again. Tony, right now, when I just tried to tell you how it made me feel, you made me feel even worse. Maybe Tony will get it this time. But if his name is Tony, he's not going to get it this time. He's going to say, look, this is really getting ridiculous. Tony, you're looking angry right now, and that's making me feel... And now maybe so one of two things are going to happen. Either Tony gets it, or your client realizes Tony should not be in your life. Because you want to be surrounded by people who can really tune into you. So it's a very difficult thing to do, but that's what you want to train the client to do. Those are the two steps. Yes?
I guess I'm just wondering, do you recognize just the benefit of just internally doing that? Like I'm sitting here and all of a sudden you reach for your
practice.
cell phone, I always ask.
Absolutely.
Practice two questions. What am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? What am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? Right. And just, internally that you're having two levels of conversation.
Yes. Yeah. Practice on yourself, yeah. Yeah. So if something comes up, say to yourself, what just happened behaviorally, and how do I feel? Now the problem is this. When you look at the double bind, the original definition of double bind, actually 1958, I think it's Waslavic and a few other people, they got into this notion of the double bind. And they originally thought in 1958 it would be an explanation for schizophrenia. If schizophrenia was caused by family dynamics, they identified the double bind situation. The double bind is this. It has three elements. Something is being done to me right now. If I do nothing, I pay the price. If I say something about it, I will also pay the price. The third element is I can't escape. So it's a double-bind situation, and they can't escape. When you look at it more closely in terms of the neurological, what it is it's a statement or a response where the left brain is saying, there's no big deal here. The right brain is saying, why is this upsetting me? Example, client, 32 years old, finally went on a date on the Saturday night. His mother called him up Sunday morning, where were you? Like the guy went out on the Saturday night date. Where were you? And so he said proudly, Mom, I went on the date. And she said, oh. That's it. Now, left brain is oh. Right brain is Mom is disappointed. Her tone. So right brain registers three things: facial expression, subliminal, vocal tone, and body gesture. So the left brain can't really grab it. Can't really, how come I'm feeling lousy? So he can't justify it. That's why they go into the shame. It must be about me. I must be too sensitive or whatever. So you're training the client to start to tune in. That's why we do body work, to become sensitive to the body. The shame moment will never be told to you by your left brain. The brain will always deceive you. It's the body that goes, gee, why did I just feel like that? Another example, I have it on the video as an example. Again, I acted out on the Saturday night. How did you feel? I don't remember. He traces it back to this is the young guy. He came home late. He went to Mass. Good Catholic boy, went to Mass in the morning. Came back. Instead of going directly home, he went to buy a jacket and buy a CD. Came back an hour later, and he came back, and already in his head, it's like, my mother's going to ask me, where was I? Why didn't I come home right away? So he bought the CD. And she said, he said, oh, I went shopping. Oh, what'd you buy? I got a CD. I got a CD and I got a jacket. Quote, Ma, you're becoming a shopper. That was it. Ma, you're becoming a shopper. Collapse. Because the words in and of themselves don't really mean anything but criticism. So that's basically what we're teaching them. Yeah.
I have two questions. One is, does the assertion shame model apply to lesbianism as well in the same way? And two, can you say more about shame? Because I think that's
so big. It's a biggie.
so big.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you have other thoughts about that.
Well, the shame is really very, very big. And that's why the neurological studies now that are being done on early infant-parent connection and the whole neurophysiology as a groundwork to psychotherapy is really about shame, because shame is that shutdown affect. And when you think about it, Freud's unconscious may well be the body. Because what is the unconscious after all? It's stuff that's coming up inside of us that is nonverbal. It may be represented symbolically, it may come up in our dreams, but it's the body. And so shame is very, very important. How does this apply to the lesbian? You'd have to see what that's about, probably. I think with the lesbian, it's really more abandonment. I mean, they go quickly into that, because really what's behind shame is really abandonment. Because when you go to the shame moment, is I am a nothing. It's really expulsion from the pack. This is very primitive in terms of evolution. If you've ever seen those movies, National Geographic on the wolves, you know, when the wolf is thrown out of a pack, one particular one, he's going to die, because no animal can live without the pack. And the child that's being excluded really feels like he's going to die. It's very, very primitive. It's instinctive bonding for survival. And you'll see that when this wolf tries to get back into the pack, he's hunkered down. Have you ever seen that? And his tail this is the shame posture. And he'll go and lick the alpha dog and try to ingratiate himself, and then the guy goes, "Arr!" And then he goes back again. It's in the body. This is the origin of shame. And Bowlby, Moberly called it defensive detachment. What Moberly called defensive detachment, we now call anticipatory shame. But when you trace it back, Moberly got defensive detachment from John Bowlby, detached defensiveness. And detached defensiveness is in his studies of infants in the hospital. Then when the child was left behind, years ago they said, all right, say goodbye, kiss the baby, and come back next week. They didn't realize the importance of the bonding. So the child would protest and cry, but then eventually collapse. Will eventually collapse. That's defensive detachment. That's dissociation. And that's the enemy of reparative therapy. That's the enemy of, and that's why the therapeutic relationship is constantly keeping them connected. What happened just now? You look like you glazed over. Not that, what happened just now? Just bring them back.